I'll start. Be me, 12-year-old Coomer, attending Catholic school with a playground that had lots of trees, like a little forest. I get detention one day and 2 of my friends stay with me to rake leaves in the forest. It is now 6-ish p.m. and we're almost done, so we start playing around throwing pebbles at each other. I see one of my friends hiding behind a tree and grab a fistful of gunk to shove it down his pants. As I approach him, I hear my 2 friends call out to me, and I'm weirded out because the only people left at school are a couple of teachers and the basketball team. I turn around and start hearing leaves rustling behind me, and I make a run for it. Spot my 2 friends and yell for help. One starts running away and the other looks like he's gonna shit his pants. I don't look back and keep running, eventually catching up to him and pull him by the arm to come with me. Other kid starts yelling for help. Basketball team and gym teacher run over to me and I black out from fear and exhaustion. Wake up in the arms of some teacher and I get laid down in the infirmary bed. My head is still throbbing and I ask for water, but the teacher leaves me there alone and gets the fuck back outside. Mom and Dad come pick me up, and Dad stays in school while my mother drives me back home. Monday comes and everyone is talking about what happened. Shit pants kid didn't come to school. I asked around and another friend told me he was sick. Get called to the mother principal's office along with the kid who ran away. My mom and his dad are there too. The nun starts apologizing to both our parents and almost begs them not to sue. I'm in the dark up to that point because my parents hadn't asked me what happened over the weekend and wouldn't answer my questions, just comfort me and let me sleep in their bed. The guy goes on a rant about how he pays good money for his son to go there and blah blah blah. Mom and I are asked to step outside for a moment and then we go back in. The nun says she's going to ask us what happened. I tell her my version. She turns to the other kid and asks if he'd like to share. Kid is visibly shaken up but starts talking. He says I got separated from the 2 other boys and that they hear me scream, and as I made my way up the little hill he saw a face staring back at them, popping up behind a tree. He says he then saw the thing start coming up behind the tree and he started to run. Says it looked all black except the face. Could have been the lighting. Nun asks him to draw the face and the kid draws some Picasso bullshit of a thing with big lips and narrow eyes. Mother what's-her-name says that'll be all for today and that we can return to our classroom. Mom kisses me goodbye and asks me to eat lunch inside instead of playing outside. I play outside anyway. Forest has people cutting down trees and a yellow tape around it. Stay near the basketball court eating lunch with the other kid and a shit ton of kids who wanted to hear the story, and they ask dumb shit like, was it Slender Man? We both exaggerate our stories and they are amazed. Couple of days go by. It's now Thursday and Shit Pants shows up. He looks okay. I go up to him and ask why he didn't come to school. Says he is changing schools. Probably because he made a scene at home. Ask him what happened after I fainted. Says he kept staring at the forest and describes the same monster my other friend drew. Says the thing just kept staring back at him even when people came to take us away. Asked gym teacher what happened that day and he says he didn't see anything at the forest, but since both my friends' stories matched up describing the thing, the mother principal got really upset and is having the trees gone for good. I get sad because I really liked the woods. I liked to climb the trees. Things return to normal. Kid's dad didn't sue. My parents take me out of there and they let me attend a regular school. Never know what happened. Mom brushes it off as kids being kids. I'm 22 now and found out my dad was really into the occult and we have similar interests because I've been reading/practicing since 20. He says it's the weirdest shit he's ever seen because we couldn't have been lying since the kids saw the same thing. Says he thinks it could have been an egregore we materialized with our collective mischief, but that the mother was convinced it was a demon and that's why she had the forest fucked over. This is a long one, so feel free to skip if you prefer short and sweet. Also, none of the names I'm going to use here are real, but the people are. When I was still working on my master's, I landed a job working part-time at a paper. It was a small-time outlet. I mainly applied because I enjoyed writing and it was pretty easy part-time work, not because I was serious about becoming a journalist. However, the boss man went ahead and saddled me with a big, feature article covering the poorest neighborhood in the city. I was very green, but my boss told me my writing style would suit the subject matter. I'm scheduled to meet up with this guy, Reverend Downey. His job is to explain a bit of the neighborhood's history to me, as well as to introduce me to a few interesting locals. So, one morning, I meet up with him at his office in the neighborhood church. Reverend Downey turns out to be hilarious. He tells me all about the neighborhood, mixing in bits of history with funny anecdotes, all great stuff for my article. As he talks, I'm taking notes when I hear a crowd gathering outside. He tells me it's the weekly food pantry setting up inside the church. Also mentions the Needle Ladies showing up. Needle Ladies, I ask? It's a group of women who set up a needle exchange on the church grounds. Drug addicts show up, tell them how many needles they use daily, and the women give them fresh needles for a week and take their used ones. The Reverend excuses himself to go check up on things. Meanwhile, I get up to stretch my legs, step out of the office where a crowd of women and children bustle about, picking out canned items spread out over a few different tables. Through a doorway on the far side, I can see out into the courtyard where the Reverend is talking to the Needle Ladies as they set up tables. I'm watching the dead-eyed druggies waiting in line when I feel a tug on my shirt. Turn around. There's a little black boy looking up at me, a giant smile on his face. "They got a nothing man buried outside," he says. At first I think he says Muffin Man. "Excuse me?" I ask. "A nothing man," he repeats. "I can see everything from my window. They made it inside. Then they took him outside and buried him." He points behind me and says, "Right there." I turn around to see Reverend Downey walking back inside. He says in his big warm voice, "Come on out, I want you to meet someone very special." I turn around to say goodbye to the little kid, but he's gone. I'm introduced to Grandma Kane, who is raising 4 grandchildren by herself. The children all have AIDS, Reverend Downey tells me. Grandma Kane and the 4 children live in a tiny room in a rundown apartment building down the street, and I walk back there with them to do a mini interview. The apartment building is absolute shit. Elevators don't work, parts of the ceiling are missing, holes in the walls exposing the wiring beneath. There's also no AC and it's the height of summer, so we're boiling as I'm interviewing frail Grandma Kane next to an open window. "They don't all have AIDS," she says of the children. "Just 3 do and 1 don't. Apparently their mother was a heroin junkie who spent most of her life in and out of jail. She basically hoarded herself out for drug money nonstop, so all of the kids have different fathers. Mom eventually went away to prison for good and the kids went to Grandma." "What about the 4th child, the one who doesn't have AIDS?" "The oldest," Grandma Kane tells me, "Martha. She claims that Martha was not born with AIDS, and that she's been tested, a very rare thing in that neighborhood. She also claims that Martha was assaulted when she was about 9 years old. Didn't get AIDS then either, luckily, but the event traumatized her. Overnight it was like a flip switched in the poor girl's head. Martha started spending all of her time running around the neighborhood with drug dealers and criminals. She's only 13 and has had 2 abortions. I asked Grandma Kane if she knows who assaulted Martha. She refuses to tell me. I'm kind of surprised. She's been so forthcoming till this point. I assume that she's afraid of someone. Was it one of the drug dealers? No, she says. So then it was one of the neighborhood boys, I say, or a man maybe. No, it wasn't one of them. She seems to be getting more and more nervous as I ask her about it. Then she says something that leaves me puzzled. Everyone knows about criminals and drug dealers, but nobody knows the truth about the ghetto. I ask her, what's the truth about the ghetto? She seems exasperated and finally says, it's just there's worse things out here than drug dealers. I press her. What things? She looks me dead in the eye and makes a motion like she's zipping her lips closed. My curiosity is piqued by this point, so I tell her we can do things off the record. I always wanted to say that, if that's what she wants. So I turn off my recorder. But she's fidgeting now, staring out the window. Before she seemed nervous, now she's scared. I say, is someone threatening you to keep quiet? She shakes her head. I ask, who are you afraid of? And she snaps at me. It's not a who, boy. Instantly, her body relaxes and her eyes seem to glaze over. She turns and looks out the window. At first I think she's just ignoring me, but then I notice her chest isn't moving. She's not breathing. I'll cut to the chase. She died right fucking there. With the grandkids screaming and crying and crowding around her, I call 911. Nobody shows up for an hour and I call again. This time I tell them I'm a reporter and a woman is dead. The dispatcher says the police will be right over, and they are. 2 squad cars, no ambulance. And it hits me. Nobody's even coming to remove Grandma Kane's corpse. After a short chat with the police where I explain what happened, they tell me to leave the premises and assure me that the body will be dealt with. Then they put the kids in the back of the car and I ask where they'll be taken. One of the officers says, probably the prison. They got a child care facility there. He wasn't joking either. By this point it's almost dark and I need to go home. I make the walk back to my car and I'm passing the church courtyard when I hear a familiar voice. You want to see where they put it? I turn around and it's the little black kid from earlier, big goofy smile on his face. After the shit I just went through, his silly grin kinda catches me off guard, and I find myself laughing a little. They put something on top of the nothing man's grave, he tells me. You can see it poking out like a belly button. He points towards the churchyard. Don't ask me why, but I walk over and begin to inspect the churchyard. I know he's probably just telling stories, but I guess partly I'm on autopilot, processing the events of the afternoon. Then, after a minute, I find a round patch of dirt that looks like it's been recently dug up. And in the center is something that kind of sparkles in the low moonlight. I reach towards it, then I pull my hand back. Squeezed into a little groove in the dirt, right in the center of the freshly dug dirt, is a human eye staring up at me. I almost gag and step back. Then I hear another familiar voice. Did you find something? It's Reverend Downey. He's leaning in the doorway of the church, almost completely hidden by the shadows. For a moment I'm at a loss for words, then I point down at my feet. Have you seen this? But he doesn't respond. He just says, I kept an eye on your car for you. Before I can respond, he says, you gotta keep an eye on things around here, he said, or they disappear. He's not smiling now, and there's no warmth in his voice like before, during our interview. Things go missing around here all the time, he tells me. Cars, people, and the cops don't even bother investigating. I get myself collected and ask, is someone buried here? Reverend Downey steps out of the shadows and says, I heard about Grandma Kane. There's an odd expression on his face. It finally dawns on me that I'm being threatened. If I weren't a reverend, I might bet you they never find what killed her, he says, and I'd win that bet. Who the hell is buried here, Reverend? I ask. It's not a who, he says, it's a what. I begin to feel nauseous then, and dizzy, and you're going to find out just what that is if you don't step back. He reaches for my hand. From that goddamn grave. He grabs my hand and yanks me back, away from the ring of recently dug dirt and from the eye in the ground, and I instantly feel better. I notice then that the Reverend is sweating heavily. His hand is on his chest, his fingers searching for his crucifix. He tells me to get on home now, and I hear a strange sound, an odd humming that seems to be coming from beneath the ground. I don't even think twice. I scramble to my car, fire the ignition, and peel out, away from the church and out of the neighborhood. As I'm driving, I pass Grandma Kane's apartment building. Glancing up at her small window, I can still see her dead body sitting up in its chair. I'm not sure if it was my imagination, or the shadows, or the fear, but it looked like it was missing an eye. Needless to say, these events shook me. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do about the article. In the end, I wound up taking the easy route and writing a feature piece like I was asked to do, focusing on the emotional struggles of living in the ghetto, ignoring all of the truly disturbing things I'd seen. I spoke to a local poet and some recovering addicts to build my piece, but I steered clear of the church and of Reverend Downey. At some point, though, I couldn't help bringing up something to the poet I was interviewing. He was a very knowledgeable historian of the neighborhood, and I asked him if he had ever heard of something called the Nothing Man. His reaction left me wondering. There was a flash of recognition in his eyes, but he insisted I only know it by name. He knew it was an old urban folk tale, popular in the neighborhood long before he had been born, and that it was now largely forgotten. It's something you might have heard kids talking about during the Depression, a spooky story to scare each other. Beyond that, I have no earthly idea.